G'day legends, I hope that you're doing really well. And today we're going to talk about some news, of course. So we're going to have a look at the maps. We're going to go over some important systems that are hit. We're going to look at some just blatant propaganda, as well as maybe some other moves on the front line. I am going to try and keep this one a little bit shorter, as I am running out of time today with a lot of other admin that I'm then doing. Now, it is said that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has changed some of the plans, more so into a single sort of fist punch down rather than fighting on multiple fronts, maneuver style, sweeping warfare from there. And that's being reported across multiple places. But of course, actual tactic strategies like that are going to be held very close to one's chest. But as we know, this isn't the first time that tactics change. Tactics change and evolve, especially as unexpected events or unexpected resistance takes place. And this is no different to what Russia has done in their initial offensive and what Ukraine has done in then these counter-offensives. We have seen how things move, how things change strategies. This is nothing really that uncommon. But let's talk about this, because Ukraine, what they really need is they really need fire control in the south. Now, Ukraine can hit any part of its occupied territory with advanced missile systems, but that is only a very small percentage. The biggest factor in this war, and will continue to be the king of the battlefield, is going to be the artillery. Yes, there's a lot of videos of choppers taking out tanks, ATGMs, javelins, NLAWs taking out tanks. If you look at the most amount of armor and as far as casualties from a single weapon system, other than troops like individual soldiers, you're looking then at artillery. These more high-end systems, these are to take out technologically advanced equipment, and we're going to look at that. But artillery will remain king of the battlefield for a long time to come. And Ukraine is using a lot of types of artillery, but the most, well, I don't want to say the most common, but at least the most effective is being the 155mm, the 155mm howitzers, such as your M777 towed artillery or your self-propelled guns, your SPGs, like, say, the French Caesar. So we're going to have a look over the maps, of course, and we're going to do this actually in the beginning before we have a look at some videos as well at what I am then talking about. So this, of course, is where Ukraine are having their offensive actions in this green and blue here. These are the amount of ground that they have cleared. Now, we're going to have a look at the map updates over the next little part of this video, but I want to talk about what here is super important. Now, we have the defensive works here, and we've got, of course, we can measure what is what. But what I want to look at is you can actually get, let's just go your towed artillery piece. You can actually put how much distance is this. Now, these are your rocket-assisted then shells. So, of course, things like the Excalibur have a lot longer range, but your typical effective range of, say, a 145 system is around your 25 to 30 kilometers, but that is absolute max effective range. One thing you need to take into account is max effective does wear out the barrel faster because you're putting more bang, more charge on that bloody bomb or that shell then launching out, and as well as you can't just put an artillery, you're not going to put just an artillery system dead on the front. So you can't just click here and go, the HIMARS is here on the front line, if that makes sense. So let's have a look at, let's just go this shell here, and let's say the systems are in here somewhere. So you can talk that just near then Tokmak, you might have some level of, I've fucked it up already. Let's go this one, and we'll go here. We're talking here, so maybe some fire control, but of course max range near Tokmak. But if they are further back here, you then catch my drift. Now, where we're talking about is important is the capturing of, say, like Tokmak or somewhere like this before the weather gets worse. And we're going to talk further about this. So if they were to get in here, you can start seeing the more control that Ukraine will gain over then these areas. Now, what is very interesting in here, and it hasn't shown up on this map for me for some reason, I'll see if I can get them up. No, it hasn't. Is then the train lines in here. Now, typically they're white upon this map. Luckily, I've got another train line map here. So this is where we're talking is in Tokmak. Now, this is where you can see then the train lines down into Kherson, and then down into then this is, of course, Crimea. And this is one of the main ways of logistical support for Russia in this area is, of course, these train lines. And you can see this doesn't have anything down in the south in here. And you can see where the deep state doesn't show you if it was working is where then the train line comes back through up to Donetsk and then crosses down into Russian territory in here. Of course, that Russian territory we've talked about is somewhat out of bounds for the Western supplied weapons. But what we're talking about is the importance of, say, getting somewhere like Tokmak to have more than control of the south. But what you get is with these sort of ideas and these numbers, you get an idea of what needs to happen. And why this is important is you need some level of control down in this region before then the weather sets in. And without this, Russia will be able to build and resupply defences over winter, and as well as the rumours of there's going to be a further mobilisation of then Russian soldiers. So this wet season, from what I'm reading, will set in around mid to late October. So another maybe 50 or 60 days, I guess, at the latest from my reading. And we've just passed 90 days then of the counter-offensive. But the southern cut, this would be a big problem for Russia. And we've known this is going to be Ukraine's tactic. Even from sort of before the counteroffensive, people were talking about this. They need to create some level of cut, whether it is from Orikhiv down to Melitopol, from Urzani down to Berdyansk to Mariupol, something like this to cut off the logistical supply then into the Kherson Oblast, then into Crimea. So, of course, we have the way the road and railway can then move across the Kerch into eastern Crimea and up into the south there. So if it was then cut off, and a cut off does not mean that you need true, it doesn't mean you can liberate all this. It just means you've got then fire control, making then movements so much harder here. So making Russia's logistical movements very, very difficult. We know Russia can supply Crimea by other means, but it's not as easy as supplying by train line or by road then down through here in the south through Melitopol, or of course then through sort of southeastern Crimea across then the Kerch. So if there was a southern cut, it makes it just a lot more difficult there. And as we've seen, Ukraine has a lot more power now in the Black Sea with its use of these kamikaze suicide drones hitting boats a long way out from Ukraine. So we know they've got a fair distance of range. What we haven't seen is any power in here. Of course, this is then the Sea of Azov. A very interesting thing is Russia's inland waterways and seas. So in Rostov-on-Don, we can see then through here these channels. These can carry full cargo, tankers, whatever, up into then inland seas and can actually go from here right up into Moscow and as well then pop out into the North Sea, being on, depending on the type of years, with submarines, warships, whatever in here. So there will be definitely a supply potentially in through to Crimea through the Sea of Azov if this south gets cut. But as well, that is nowhere near as efficient. That slows things down dramatically. It's going to be a huge, huge hit. So what most people are saying is Ukraine, before the weather sets in, they need to get somewhere where they can then have fire control more into Melitopol, Berdyansk, somewhere like this. Melitopol seems like the most obvious because we have this spire of sea come up into here, that it is the shortest distance from where it is through. But if you look at the defensive works from Russia, they tend to have built up this area the most because of, I guess, that threat to cut off the Kherson Oblast and then Russia's most western campaign and Crimea through here. So it is interesting to look at what could actually take place there. And so Mikhailo Podolyak, the advisor for, of course, the head of office, President Zelensky, has then had this to say on Twitter. From a military point of view, the Ukrainian army today is solving tasks of extreme complexity, none of which have been experienced by any army since World War II. This deserves at least respect and, in fact, great admiration. None of our allies' military operations in the Middle East or in the 1990s, 2000s can be compared to the Ukrainian counteroffensive, as we are attacking a well-prepared defence without having numerical advantage and without even 10% of the forces and means that our allies would operate with. Like, for example, thousands of hours of air raids before the start of the grand operation in Operation Desert Storm. If you want to see a sort of combined air attack go on YouTube, you go like Operation Desert Storm first 24 hours air raid or something, and you can see the coalition of Western jets, Western air forces, how they did that, and it's very impressive from there. It's like a breakdown of it. And yet we are advancing. We're advancing every day, pushing the Russians back and liberating our territory. The question is why Russian defense lines became possible at all. It has to do with the speed of political decision-making by our partners. Timing matters. Let's learn this lesson. And this ties into what we were saying and to a lot of Ukrainian officials' points that because the West took a lot of time to make decisions on different missile systems, F-16s, for example, other systems coming in, main battle tanks, strikers, things like this, that the question is why Russia's defense lines became possible at all. Because of that delay, Russia was able to build up these lines more. It has to do with the speed of political decision-making. So putting it back onto them, although Ukraine so far has got basically everything that they have asked for other than a few. And this ties into what I was saying is we're not going to see F-16s until mid next year at the absolute bare minimum. And some of the other things asked for, if it's been 18 months, I'm not sure yet if it's going to go from a cross in a box to a tick in a box overnight, maybe potentially. But that if Ukraine doesn't get into a region where they can have fire control from artillery, at the end of the day, artillery is the backbone, that your more complex missile systems, they're used for, high value targeting of specific things, your HIMARS, your, what are they called? The shit name ones, the UK Storm Shadow, things like this. But your artillery, that's that rolling sort of thunder then on the battlefield. And I want to have a look at, while we're talking about striking those bits, there was a big loss for Russia. So the Ukrainian Armed Forces has conducted a HIMARS strike recently on the port of Zalizny, and that is going to be pronounced incorrectly, I'm sorry, but it's in the Kherson Oblast. Of course, this is the Kherson Oblast, and down in here is Zalizny port as well. So there was a HIMARS strike. Somewhere from there has hit it. And as well, what you can do, I've only learnt to do this today because I'm an idiot, and you can actually have a look at potential areas of then the HIMARS. Of course, these are not in service yet, ATACMS style. So let's just get one of these. The port of Zalizny, where was I? Down here. And somewhere within this bubble. So that is the range of the HIMARS. And of course, that range is going to become more significant once Ukraine can continue pushing down, if they can get into Melitopol, Tokmak, areas like this. And of course, if they can get to there, they've got more control. But if it is a straight push down, is Ukraine going to put the most valued sort of HIMARS system down in a fist formation? Maybe not yet, but this is sort of what we're looking at the moment. So Tokmak is still well within range. This is what I'm saying. The most important bit is still your main shelled artillery. But I digress. So in the port of Zalizny, in the Kherson region, they destroyed a Predel-E, which is a coastal over-the-horizon radar system, which has only been in service since 2020, and the cost of up to $200 million, as well as a Lear-2 EW electronic warfare system. So let's have a look then of the footage that has come out of this here. Might just have to mute this. So here is the Lear-2 EW system taken out. And then the Predel-E OTH system. I can show. And then we can see then it being struck there, then on the beach, and then further destroyed as well. Now, this is that Predel-E OTH system, and it doesn't look that impressive, but over-the-horizon systems are an incredibly important bit of kit. And with this particular system, it's reported that Russia has less than 25 systems. Now, Australia is actually a world leading in this over-the-horizon system, and this can break down somewhat of how important it is. So Australia is the world leader in high-frequency skywave over-the-horizon radar. The technology has beginnings in research in the ionosphere conducted in weapons research establishment in the 50s. Unlike traditional radars that were limited by the line of sight, the Jindalee high-frequency OTHR, conceived and designed by Australian scientists, use the ionosphere above the Earth's surface. The high-frequency radio signal was beamed skywards with a transmitter and refracted down from the ionosphere to illuminate a target. The echo from the target travelled back by a similar path to separate receiver site. Received data was processed into real-time tracking information. So line of sight, something you can just look at, like a gunshot is line of sight typically. And then you have artillery, which is, not, over maybe your horizon, but it's going to an area which is not line of sight. And that's how that radar is working. Typically, radar needs to see, and you have blind spots as well, where these can travel a long, long way. And of course, that is a very important system for the Russian military that's been taken out, and a very expensive bit. Now, I want to have a look at some footage as well. Here we have named safety boots. This is a cluster munition supplied to Ukraine here.
From this belt.
Talking about where you can then cut
because
this.
there was another plate here.
I like the appropriate footwear. This is the sort of footwear the boys be working on their 4-drives with, but maybe not this amount of bang. So then cuts the head off it and gets to where the cluster bomblets then sit, and reportedly them then being used for extra bang upon then drones. So the amount of those, you can then arm far more drones out from there. Now, speaking of drones, I've got this on the importance of drones. Now, these are Ukrainian soldiers here. Let's definitely get rid of that music. And then we have Russian soldiers up here, and just this heavily vegetated, built up wooded area here. Well, not built up wooded, but you can see the vegetation. They just completely can't see each other. So these are the Ukrainians, these are the Russians, within 5 meters of each other. 15 feet, completely just missing each other here. Anyway, the drone providing some level of surveillance, then the Ukrainians must get some word that they have then seen them, and then engage the target from there. And that importance of drones in modern warfare cannot be overstated. It is unbelievably important now, and will become more and more important into the future. Now, let's have a look at then this Russian propaganda ad. Now, we know Ukraine has been successful not only taking prisoners of war from Russia, but also as getting Russians to defect to Ukraine. You're flying even helicopters in full of parts for aircraft, dropping flyers to get Russians to I think what's called the I Want to Survive or I Want to Live program to come through to Ukraine, as well as Captain HIMARS saying, if you send the air locations where you are, we won't target that if you can send locations of other areas. Now, Russia released this one, and I haven't really seen one like this, called This Is Your Last Remaining Chance. So here we have, and I'm going to have to cut out little bits and pieces, but it will be in my Telegram if you are interested. We have a Ukrainian soldier here on the battlefield. And then, let me turn this up. Here it is, your counteroffensive. Now, I can't show you here, but then he gets shot. And then it says, you thought you had a good chance of surviving. You didn't want to flee the country in a woman's dress. Your mother didn't have enough money for a bribe. Your father wasn't helped by old connections. Now, we know that Ukrainian officials have come out in the past few weeks, and this was known from the beginning of the war, that you could pay your way out of the country or get a medical certificate, things like this to get out. But there was an amount of people taking bribes to make fake medical certificates, pay off border guards, things like this, then to get out of the country. Now, I can't show this, but he's back on the ground, has been shot. And then it shows, it goes like, it rewinds through him coming out around from this corner. But now you have one last chance to save your life. And instead of coming out and then shooting, he comes out with his hands up and surrenders to then the Russian forces here and is taken prisoner. And this says, this is your last chance. So the full video will be, of course, on my Telegram here, but trying to get Ukrainian soldiers to defect to the Russians. As we have seen, Ukraine have a lot more success with that, with the Russians going that way. But don't be fooled, there are ones who have gone the other way. Even, I can't remember his name now, but a very infamous Westerner who went that way as well. Now, Sarah on Twitter has released this urgent video titled, let's bring up screenshot here first. Urgent, Ukrainian liberation is upon us. The armed forces of Ukraine is preparing to cross the river, the Dnipro. the TDF HQ is making official appeal for donations to fund boats for the voyage. And from what I've seen now, it's about $12,000 or $13,000 that Sarah's reported.
An urgent appeal direct from headquarters. The time has arrived. Boat season is here. On behalf of the commander of TDF Media, Colonel Alexei Dmitrievsky, every soldier of the Territorial Defense Forces of Ukraine, and all Ukrainians, we need you to donate now for the boats that the ZSU will use to liberate Ukraine. Every donation will go towards taking us across the Dnieper and towards a full return of Ukraine's 1991 borders. Donate at the link below and be a part of these history-making voyages. Slava Ukraini!
So Sarah then says across the Dnieper. Now, we have seen a successful landing from Ukraine across into Crimea from Special Forces, a small landing party there. And as we know, Novokhovka, this is where the dam was taken out. Of course, it flooded downstream, but that is drying out quickly. And of course, upstream has dried out significantly more. So, of course, they're not going to release details of where these boats could then cross, but it could be really anywhere across here in teams. Thing is, funding boats like this, these sort of boats, these aren't going to take armor systems like that. So the range of how far you can push in is going to be limited to smaller landings. We've talked before about M2 Bradleys and M113s have ability to be amphibious. How successful is that going to actually be? Like, yes, they can swim across things in really good condition, but with external armor, things like this, the upkeep amphibious, I think some civilians may think that an amphibious vehicle just means, fuck yeah, we're just driving into water. There's a lot more in it than that is. So it'll be interesting to see maybe what happens across the Dnieper. So we know it's going to be this part of the Dnieper, but we are not 100% sure whereabouts that is going to be, as it has dried up in some areas, flooded in others, very muddy in some areas as well. Now, there is definitely still concern about Wagner PMC in Belarus. So Mariusz Kamiński, the Polish Minister for Interior Administration, has said today that Poland and the Baltic states, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, will close their borders entirely if a critical incident takes place. So let's look at how this was then being reported from Reuters here. So the countries have also seen an increase in the amount of mainly Middle Eastern and African migrants trying to cross the border in recent months to accuse Belarus of facilitating them, the claim which Minsk then rejects. We demand from the authorities in Minsk that the Wagner Group immediately leave the territory of Belarus and that illegal migrants immediately leave the border area and are sent back to their home countries. This is from Mariusz Kamiński here with his Lithuanian, Latvian and Estonian then counterparts. We'll have more on this. If there is a critical incident, regardless of whether it is at the Polish or Lithuanian border, we will retaliate immediately. All border crossings that have been opened so far will be closed. Furthermore, so Lithuanian Interior Minister told the media that there would be two criteria that could lead to a border closure. First of all, an armed incident at the border of one of these countries. The incident would need to pose serious threat to national security. The other criteria is a mass breakthrough of migrants through the border of one of these states. Now, Poland has closed all but one crossing with Belarus this year following the imprisonment of a journalist of Polish origin, while Lithuania have 4 remaining checkpoints open. And let's look at that region and what they then are talking about. So, of course, this is Belarus, Lithuania, and Poland here. So there has been this ongoing rumor, and these states are taking this very seriously, that Wagner Group was in, of course, Belarus to push across the Suwalki Gap into Kaliningrad, essentially cutting off Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Of course, they would just get fucking whacked if that happened. And there was even rumor floating around that that was on purpose. That was Russia's way. We saw how Russia got rid of Prigozhin. Maybe that was the way to get rid of the PMC. So very interesting sort of theory there, but talking about that those border closures then could take place, and of course taking those threats then very seriously. So the MOD has reported as well that Russia has cancelled this exercise. So Russia has highly likely cancelled exercise Zapad West 23, its joint strategic exercise, the JSE, and major annual event intended to be the culmination of the military training year. The exercise should have taken place in September 23. From 2010, Russia ran a 4-cycle rotating JSCs around the country. However, since 21, Russia has based the JSC in Western Russia. At least every second year, it is prioritised confronting what it perceives as the threat from NATO. This follows the PAD 21, the largest Russian exercise since Soviet times. The Russian military's underperformance in Ukraine has highlighted how joint strategic exercises have had limited training value and have largely been for show. Russia has likely cancelled the PAD 23 because too few troops and equipment are available. There is a realistic possibility that Russian leadership is also sensitive to domestic criticism, liable from running another joint strategic exercise during wartime. And we have seen that people in Russia have criticised the government for these parades, things like this, and when they're struggling in the frontline regions over their so-called special military operations. So very interesting this, and this actually ties somewhat into the interview yesterday that really said, and not in these words, but that Russia wasn't expecting so much resistance in this war and definitely didn't train at the scale that was actually needed for an efficient and effective then invasion. And the Soviet structure doesn't really work as well as other structures around the world, like, say, ours, with commanders if there's then a loss of commander. So say in a section of 8 men, everyone knows who steps up if someone's killed. So the section commander at the top of that, if he gets taken out, Lance Corporal steps in and everyone sort of bumps up a position, and that makes a lot of sense. If the sergeant's taken out, the most senior corporal will step into that position, and that works all the way up the ranks. So, well, maybe if you're very unlucky, but a digger at some point could become the commanding officer of a fucking battalion if, you know, there was that amount of loss. But it's a clear structure of who goes through. The Soviet system has far different with the non-commissioned, with junior non-commissioned officers, and officers have a lot more reach over an amount of guys. So if one person gets taken out, next thing you can sort of have a flailing unit on then the front line. Now, we looked at the maps at the beginning. Let's then look at the maps. Again, of course, we have Ukraine, the capital of Kyiv, red areas being occupied since 22, and the purple since 23. Of course, this is Crimea, where we have spoken about. Now, far west, we haven't seen any changes. Ukraine today has officially said that they have control of Robotyne. So let's look at the statement then released, I believe, by Hanna Maliar, that Robotyne has been liberated and our troops are moving southeast, from Deputy Defence Minister Hanna Maliar there. So that continual push down there. So I spoke to you guys a few days back. Now, what I did miss was Russia actually did take a little bit of ground in here near Novoporivka, and that has really changed, but we have seen just a little bit more ground taken up here, but no real major shifts in around Robotyne. As we know, there's been a big push there, and it has then further slowed down. Although the ISW map has shown that Ukraine has taken more ground up to where then these positions are. So these are the built-up works, of course, being simulated by this black line here, but by the red on here. And I don't have it on me, but in the edit, I'll put yesterday's map on the left, 2 days ago on the left, and then this one then on the right. As well, we have then the Rybar Russian sources map, and this shows very similar. Of course, this southeastern push, Robotyne, this still shows as grey zone. Many Russian sources are still saying that Robotyne is still very contested. But that Russia does definitely not have control of it by this map, but that Ukrainian sources are still pushing then to the southeast further down here. And that at least the pushes tend to line up with then what we are seeing. So next we're going to move up to, because we have seen a lot of change. Now, the daily Ukraine map update doesn't show any different over the past few days in this region. Let's just have a quick squiz. So very similar to what we have seen previously. But what we are going to do is come up into this other offensive push. So I guess the second most. So we've seen Robotyne the most, and then this area around Starmorsky, Urazani area. 2 weeks ago we saw Ukraine get under control of Urazani, and we saw that there was a step out here that could be cut off, which has then occurred. So we see between yesterday and today, right there, we see that amount of Russian ground was lost there from that cut off, and this is showing very similar then on then this map, but more than 2 days ago we see that then come down to where it is. Now, I missed this the first time I looked, but if we have a look around this rear area here, we do see Ukraine make an amount of ground down in this position. So let's have a look. Right, 2 days ago, right there. Now, this looks like a lot more than on the daily Ukraine map update. So we're looking here. We see that step down there. So we see the first step, 2627, then 27 to 28. We see that further step down push there. So in this area, we haven't seen too much pushing yet, but now we're seeing this. That is just then to the west of Ugledar and between Uruzani. So we could maybe see more pushing from there. Now, there hasn't been any real change up around the Avdiivka area. There's this small advance shown then on the deep state map, but more just a restructuring of the front line there, a push back into then what looks like a tree line off some rail line there. But then we jump onto the Ukraine daily map update. Now we push up into here, and this looks like a lot more. So we're talking to the north west of then Avdiivka. This is then the train line we see. And we see this is train line and a long way push back into there. So it is showing like a lot more of a push. So then we come into Bakhmut, and we do know Ukraine was pushing very hard around Klishkivka and Rivka, and we see more just marginal small gains around that region. And then we'll look at Bakhmut, of course, then on the Ukraine daily map update. So let's have a look down in the south and Rivka, Klishkivka region, and we don't see too much more of a shift there, but then continually then more pushing in and around that region. Other than that, we're not seeing any changes up and down the front line on then the deep state map. We're not seeing any movements from Stov, where we've seen Russia have a westerly push, and we haven't seen any movement coming down into Kupiansk, where Russia is having a southerly push. Now, many Ukrainian sources, even the ISW, are reporting there's a mass of up to 100,000 Russian troops in this area, and we haven't seen any changes here. Of course, we don't have Surak Maps with us today. He's away, I'm pretty sure, from looking at his Twitter, but we did see that there was more advancement here on his map, but not showing anything on either of the daily map or deep state. But the amass of troops there isn't really being shown to have much success, if that amass actually is there as well. Legends, looking at the time, this one has run long. I do apologise. I'm trying to keep these shorter, but I like shit talking. Anyway, if you'd like to support me, the link's down below. Thank you for the support on the video yesterday. I really appreciate it. Look after yourself. Have a great day, great week. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.